All right, so what I'm hoping to do today is share some really nice results with you from the therapeutic work that the HDA and I have been doing together. And the first thing that I always say when I talk about this is that I'm not here just as me, but I'm here as somebody who works with a team of people, and we've all worked on this together. You can see lots of names on this front slide here. This is very much a sort of co-delivered piece of work. Now, I guess the first thing to say after that is thank you. Now, this usually comes at the end of the presentation, but I think it's incredibly important to talk about this first here, because the therapy work we've been doing does not work without the people who've come along, they've tried the therapy, they've given us their time, and they've been very brave and come along to something that they didn't know was going to be helpful necessarily, but they've allowed us to try and build something really special. So I wanted to start by saying thank you. I also want to say thank you to the HDA, because none of it would be happening without the HDA and the brilliant staff, without HD Voice helping us to put this together, without the HDA Young Adults Network and the people from Leicester who are part of our local network here. We're really appreciative for all of this. So while it is me here talking, it does not mean that I'm the only person involved by a very long way. Now, having said that, I guess the first thing that I want to talk about is to give you a tiny bit of my background, I suppose. And I'm going to do that really briefly, because I think lots of people have probably got a bit of an idea of who I am, and who I am is not super important, but a tiny bit about why I ended up doing what I'm doing. So I am a clinical psychology researcher. I've been working to try and support people from HD families for about 13 years now, and that involves trying to understand the kind of difficulties people experience around mental well-being, and also trying to develop new interventions, which is the work that I'm here to talk about today. Over the last 3 years, I've put together these psychological therapies called Keeping Yourself in Mind, which I'll be talking about quite a bit as we go along. And these are for addressing mental well-being in families that are affected by Huntington's, because there is not an awful lot out there for supporting people who are in that situation. The purpose of today, talking about this work that we've been doing, going through how we've been trying to support people affected by HD, people who have the gene expansion themselves, and people who are in their families and have loved ones who do. And then we'll also be making sure that you understand a bit about what that experience has been like for the people who've come along to those groups. So I'll start by talking a bit about the mental well-being needs linked to being affected by HD. I have talked about this quite a bit. You may even have been to webinars where I've done that before. I'm going to talk about the essentials today, just to make sure we have time for everything else. But the HDA have some brilliant webinars by lots of people which cover these in more detail. I'll talk about the therapy programs we've developed and how they work, and then I'll talk about the findings from how it's going. What I'm not going to do today is lean very heavily on numbers, because again, that's something that I've done before. I think lots of people are familiar with the kind of numerical outcomes in terms of how things are shifting for people who've come along to these groups. I'll touch on those really briefly, but what I've really got today for you are stories. So I'm a therapist, I like stories, I like talking to people, and we've been conducting some work with people who have been through this therapy to understand what's working for them, why it's working, how we can do it better. And that's the biggest stuff that I want to share with you today, so that you can get a sense of the work that we're doing and the difference that it's hopefully making for people. And then I'll finish by talking about what our next steps will look like in the HD community. Hopefully that all sounds okay. So in terms of mental well-being needs for people who are affected by Huntington's, everybody here, I'm going to assume, is well aware that Huntington's causes all kinds of difficulties, which are incredibly difficult for people to deal with a lot of the time. It does cause physical changes. We know this is probably the most widely recognized impact of Huntington's in terms of people's career, in terms of their independence. But it also causes cognitive difficulties, changes in emotional well-being, in personality and behavior. And these can start kicking in 15 years, maybe longer, before the onset of those physical difficulties. So people are experiencing difficulties linked to Huntington's for a long time before those physical symptoms kick in. And this has really understandable impacts on people who have Huntington's and on their family members. We know that people experience distress, anxiety, low mood, they grieve, and this is all really understandable, difficult stuff. However, we don't know enough about it. The emotional well-being problems that come with Huntington's have not been very thoroughly researched. There is lots of really good work going on, but it's still very much a work in progress. And this means that when we want to offer meaningful and effective clinical interventions, there's still a lot more work to be done there too. As I've said, there are a huge range of difficulties linked to Huntington's, and sometimes I go into all this in detail. Today, I'm not going to do that, but what I do want to think about is all of the impacts that these difficulties can have on emotional well-being. So we know that as people start to develop those motor difficulties around middle age, you get these involuntary movements, you get the slowing of movements, these feed into the diagnostic process. It starts to impact on people's ability to care for themselves, on their independence, on their ability to engage in the stuff that really matters to them. And that has an impact on your sense of who you are and on your mental well-being. We also see these changes in cognition that I've mentioned kick in well before physical changes, and it's, in terms of the impacts, it's relatively global. They happen at different stages of HD progression, differently for different people at times, but there are significant impacts in terms of how well people can process information, how well they can remember information, how well people can cope in lots of different ways, which again starts to impact on both your sense of who you are, and if you're a caregiver or a family member, it starts to impact on how much support you're giving that person and on how that person interacts with you. So again, really impactful for mental well-being. As a result of lots of these difficulties, we do start to see that people with Huntington's often have changes in their behavior. So they might start to take risks that they might not have taken before. They might start to be a bit disinhibited. So they might say things or act in ways that are a bit impulsive. Again, that might seem unfamiliar to someone who's known that person a long time. You might see people being aggressive, and I've got that in quote marks because we usually think of aggressive looking behavior as trying to communicate something. People might do it because they're frustrated or in pain or struggling in some way. But we might see people being verbally or physically aggressive to people around them or harming themselves. All of these things obviously really impactful for emotional well-being for the person with Huntington's and for their family members. So all of the emotional impacts that we see, the ones that are listed here, the low mood, the anxiety, the irritability and anger, frustration, the denial, the shock, the grief, these are all going to be really familiar to anybody who knows Huntington's, whether you're supporting people with it or you're a person who has it or you're living at risk or you're gene positive. These are likely going to be familiar to you to some degree. So there's been quite a bit of research carried out into these, and some of our recent work has shown that members of families who are affected by Huntington's do tend to experience in particular low mood and anxiety and anger, and some of that stuff doesn't seem to matter so much whether you carry the gene expansion or not. So these things that have traditionally been seen as Huntington's symptoms, I'm doing air quotes, symptoms, these things may also be products of living in a really difficult situation, which can make you feel low and anxious and angry, frustrated. It can make you grieve. And all of those are understandable reactions to the difficulties of living in that context with HD. We've also seen, and I'll talk about this more in a moment, that Huntington starts to impact on relationships between family members and on people's relationships with their wider social networks. So we start to see difficulties in terms of those connections, which again impact on mental well-being because people need those support structures, and it does make a difference. We also know it can be hard for people to gain knowledgeable professional support, and this is a story I hear over and over again in therapy and in my work with the HD community more broadly, that it's extremely difficult to get decent mental health support relating to Huntington's. It does depend on your area. So I'm from Leicester. We have a brilliant local service. We're very, very lucky to have that, but it's not something that is everywhere. So this affects HD families who are struggling to get kind of knowledgeable professional support. It also affects healthcare workers who are not HD experts, because when they're trying to support someone with Huntington's and they don't have that local knowledge, or they don't know where to look for it. Obviously, the HDA is wonderful, but sometimes people don't even know to reach out for that. So this can all affect the support that's available to HD families when they're struggling with all of these things. We have just put together a systematic review, which means looking at all of the publications that are out there regarding how HD affects well-being among family members who are affected by Huntington's. And this is kind of a nice way to sum up a lot of these difficulties that I'm talking about, because we found there are kind of 4 major areas where people struggle. People find that they start to feel a bit kind of disintegrated is the word that we kind of went with. So feeling separated from society, feeling that being affected by Huntington's, whether you have it or it's in your family, it makes you different, that people don't understand what that's like. And I think probably a lot of people in here are going to agree with that feeling and understand that feeling. And that can mean it's the general public not understanding Huntington's or even knowing anything about it, but it can also be friends or even more distant family. So there was sometimes this sense that the family unit becomes very small. They're the only ones who understand what it's like and what you're going through, and people find that really hard. People can also feel quite unsupported, can feel quite judged. People always have opinions, don't they? And often people are experiencing other people's opinions as quite unhelpful and difficult, and that can make you kind of want to withdraw and not try to engage with wider society in that way. People also talked about, understandably, these kind of emotional and psychological struggles that I've already been talking about. So feeling emotionally overwhelmed and often tired, that goes for people with Huntington's and also people who are caregivers. People in HD families often worrying about the future, either for themselves or for their loved ones, and also grieving the losses that they're experiencing. So people with Huntington's losing things that they care about doing, or feeling that they're changing, their loved ones feeling that they're changing. People would talk about the impacts in the wider family as well, like if you're a caregiver, then maybe feeling that you can't spend as much time with your kids as you'd like because you've got that caregiving role that is taking up so much of your energy and your time. And people were using a lot of kind of internal defense, I guess, to manage their emotions, blocking out Huntington's. Some of that is about the lack of insight that can come with HD, where people are not so aware of their difficulties. But some of it was also a bit of repression. So actually, I'm going to put HD to the side. I'm just going to try and live my life. But that does take an emotional toll. People also talked about the demands of life with Huntington's, so caregiving demands, or just trying to cope with the way that it impacts on finances, on your ability to work, on whether you need to change your jobs. And people talked about a lack of support from formal sources. And I don't need to see the audience here to know that people are going to be nodding at that one, because often it feels really, really hard to get the kind of support you need. So people did talk about not feeling that healthcare people really understand Huntington's, not feeling that other formal places like schools are really able to understand what you're going through and support people appropriately. And families just end up trying to cope themselves, trying to educate themselves, and then finding that they even have to educate those professional people to tell them about HD and try to guide them, which just is a really big toll on people. And people spoke about how the family system kind of shifts to accommodate Huntington's. So changes in the balance of relationships. So for example, people who are partners or who are married might shift from that sort of partnership dynamic to the person who's doing the caring and the person who's being supported. Or it might be that a child ends up taking on some more responsibility than they might otherwise expect to at that age, as they're trying to support a parent who's unwell. So people talked about these kind of changes in responsibilities and roles, but they also talked about some of the positives, which was really lovely to see, because they spoke about the new identities that came with it, their ability to cope or to grow through difficulties, and kind of feeling they didn't want to let HD win. So they were thinking about how this recalibration, it kind of goes both ways. There is a lot of tough stuff that comes with it, but there are also positives that people can find, because people are brilliant and resilient and they find ways to grow. So the reason that I told you about all of that stuff before I get on to talking about the therapy is because psychological symptoms of Huntington's are complicated. Yeah, that's an understatement. But a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about, a lot of the things that are causing difficulties for HD families in terms of emotional well-being, are not linked in that biological component of Huntington's. So we know that mental health difficulties in HD are likely at least partially rooted in the biological changes that come with Huntington's, but there are emotional and so-called systemic components which can. That means the interactions with the people that you see regularly, that you love, the people who are part of your family, your friends, that system, and the emotional difficulties that you're trying to manage within it, those are places that we can make a difference. So mental well-being in Huntington's is not something that we are helpless against, that we can't do anything about. And supporting people from HD families, whether they have the gene expansion or not, is really important for supporting well-being and helping people maintain mental health as HD progresses. We can't stop it progressing, not yet, but we can support people to fight back and to hang on to that better mental well-being as well as they can. And that's what we're all about and what I'm here to talk about today. This is the bit where I talk a bit about acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT, because acceptance and commitment therapy is a little bit of a mouthful. So some people will have heard me say this part before. I've been talking about this for a long time, so apologies to those for whom this is familiar. But a lot of therapies out there, such as cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT, which is a really common one to be offered if you're experiencing mental health difficulties, they can be quite focused on how you're behaving, how you're thinking, and how you're doing it wrong. Again, I'm doing the air quotes here, but there is a little bit of a sense of you are behaving in an unhelpful way. Sometimes it's called a maladaptive way. What it's really saying is the way you're behaving, the way you're thinking is contributing to sustaining those difficulties, which may in some ways be true. And if we can change those things, then that will help things to feel better. And that can be a good way to think. There is lots of evidence for things like CBT being really helpful if you have low mood or depression, if you have anxiety. But this really depends on the issue that you're dealing with, because it's not always the case that changing how you think or changing how you behave is going to fix the difficulty. And as therapists, it is really important for us to think about the circumstances the person is in, the difficulty that they're coping with, and their relationships with the people around them, what kind of support they have, what their system looks like, for therapy to be really meaningful and effective. And when we're thinking about Huntington's, we know that no matter how much you change your thoughts or your behavior, that isn't going to solve HD. HD will still be there. So we do need a different approach for therapy to be helpful for people affected by Huntington's. I have been saying this for a long time now. People have definitely heard me say this before, but acceptance and commitment therapy is, I strongly feel, and we've been doing work in this way for about 3 years now, this is a better fit for people who are affected by Huntington's than approaches which focus on just changing thoughts and behavior in that kind of more biomedical way. ACT is about acknowledging and accepting, first of all, that some things in life are painful and difficult, but can't be changed, and thinking about how we react to them and how we can try to react to them in a different way. It involves some more practical elements as well, so identifying the things that are most important to us in life. Sometimes it's talked about as our compass points, our values. So figuring out the things that make life feel rich, meaningful, purposeful to us, and everybody's going to be different. And then using those to take steps in life, practical, actual steps in our real life to align more with those values, to bring in more of the stuff that really matters to us to help our mental well-being. Alongside that, we teach skills for identifying thoughts that are unhelpful or unhealthy or not helping us to engage in a positive way, I guess, because that's really hard to do. But getting people to engage with those thoughts differently rather than constantly battling against them, becoming exhausted, fighting hard to change them. Now, all of this done together helps people take steps towards a richer and meaningful life. What we often find is people at the time that they're coming for therapy or they're looking for therapy, they're often really struggling with the amount of distress that they're experiencing, and that can lead to some unhelpful coping strategies. This is a slide that has a ton of psychology jargon on it, so I've got it all in air quotes to flag it up. People often find themselves engaging in what's called in the therapeutic model experiential avoidance. But what that means is using coping strategies which help you push away that distress and help you feel as though you can keep going. It's a bit of a survival strategy. But ultimately, a lot of the things that we're doing that are not so helpful for us can create higher stress and anxiety. So it doesn't help us in the long run if we're engaging in these kind of more unhelpful strategies. People can also feel really overwhelmed by the sort of difficult thoughts and emotions and beliefs that come with these difficult situations that we're in. So it can feel as though, coming back to Huntington's, somebody said to me once that it feels as if Huntington's just reaches everywhere in your life. I think the exact thing they said was, it feels like HD's long fingers just reach everywhere. And that was such a vivid image that it stuck with me for many years now. But that can be what it feels like, that HD is just taking over everything, that it's overwhelming, and that it's really difficult to focus on the things that actually really matter to you. So you can fall out of touch with what you value. And at the same time, people are spending lots of time thinking about the past, maybe thinking about regrets, maybe feeling angry about things that have been unfair, and worrying about what's coming next in the future. And this applies to lots of people coming for therapy for any reason, but I think it's particularly important around Huntington's because we do spend lots of time thinking back to the past or worrying about the future. And what that means is we're not present in the moment. We're not able to focus on what matters to us right now because we're spending all of that time pulled back or pulled forward. Now, acceptance and commitment therapy tries to improve what's called psychological flexibility, and that's a terrible term because it doesn't tell anybody what it means unless you're a therapist and you already know. But it's about trying to help people disengage from those difficult thoughts and beliefs, not feeling overwhelmed, feeling more able to move away from those really difficult and painful experiences in order to focus on the stuff that really matters. That helps you to create actual change in the way that you're living your life and start to focus more on the things you really value. And all of this helps to improve mental well-being. That's the theory. Now, how we actually do that. We put together Keeping Yourself in Mind about 3 years ago, give or take, and this is an ACT intervention which is based on clinical experience, mine and other people's, research findings, mine and other people's, and talking to people who are affected by Huntington's. So at the start I said thank you to HD Voice, to the Leicester HD Network, and to the Young Adults Network. All of these people fed us information and help that were really important in figuring out what things we needed to be doing here. We've also, because we've run these groups, I've lost track. There are people here who will definitely know. I think we've run about 10 of these courses now. So we've had lots of feedback from people who've been through them, who've talked to us about what it was like, who've told us how we can do things better. So we've tweaked and tweaked as we've gone. And I think we're getting better every time. This is, of course, run with the HDA, but it's always good to say that. And we have so far established groups of people affected by Huntington's in many different ways now. So people who are gene positive, either symptomatic or pre-symptomatic, people at risk of Huntington's, or people who are supporting someone with HD or JHD. And we also run a specific group for people who are caregivers of somebody who's living in a care home. So we're trying to support as many groups as we can. The actual group format is it's an 8-week intervention, which means that people come along to a 1.5-hour session once a week over those 8 weeks, which we do online over Zoom. We usually have between 6 and 8 attendees. It has fluctuated as low as 4 and as high as 9, I think. But we try not to get too much outside that, because once the groups get too big, people sort of feel, some people who are less comfortable talking in groups can feel like it's not so easy to talk. So if we keep the groups relatively small, it feels comfortable for everybody, hopefully. These groups are run by a clinical psychologist, which so far has been me, and an HDA advisor who is absolutely invaluable. All of the people who've done it have been absolutely wonderful. We do have some similarities in the program structure between these groups that I've been talking about, but each population we're working with, whether it's people who are at risk or gene positive or symptomatic or caregivers, we think about the specific difficulties being faced by those groups. But all of them will have that focus from ACT on recognizing psychological difficulties, learning new ways to cope, teaching a kind of a toolkit of useful skills for helping to cope differently with difficult situations, and then finding those ways to move forward, to make changes, to think about your values. So during the groups, we focus on, first of all, helping people become more aware of their emotional well-being, because often people are doing that kind of what I call experiential avoidance, but that kind of coping by not looking at it, coping by distraction, whatever it might be, but helping people to really engage with the things that feel difficult and to think about what they're hoping will change. We teach this toolkit of skills that I've mentioned for stepping back from those difficult emotions, coping with them differently to help reduce distress, helping people work out their values, those compass points that I talked about, and we call them that because once you figured out your values, you kind of know what direction you want to go in. And then we help people help people to plan to align their life more closely with their values, to build in more of that stuff that feels valuable and meaningful to them, all of which helps to benefit mental well-being. Now, what I don't want to do is talk about therapeutic models in a kind of researchy way, because I don't think that's interesting or helpful for this kind of talk. I think it might be more helpful to talk about what it's like to actually go through the course so that people can get a sense of what that's like. So this is an imaginary person, Anna. Anna is not a real person. She's not closely modeled on a real person. She's built out of 13 years experience of working with people affected by Huntington's. So she is representative of some people who've come along to some of the groups, I think is probably fair to say, but like nobody in particular. So Anna is a caregiver for her husband, Matt, who has Huntington's, lives at home with her, and she is still working from home. She's trying to support Matt as well as she can. She enjoys her job. She's proud of what she does. And she comes along to therapy. And when she first comes, she's feeling overwhelmed. She's feeling pulled in different directions. She's struggling to look after Matt as well as she can and also keep up with work. She's worried about the future. She's seeing changes in her husband and she's grieving, and she's finding all of this really hard. And I'd say this is probably quite representative of many of the people who do come along to the groups that we have. When she first comes along, the first thing that we do really is work out what the person wants from therapy. And people often say something like they want to feel happier, they want to feel less anxious, they want to feel less unhappy, or they just want to feel better. And sometimes people just, they don't feel right, but they don't quite know how they want it to change. And that's actually very normal at the start of therapy. Now, we have been doing interviews with past group members, and I think what's really important to say is these are not done by me, they're not done by anybody who's part of the groups, because we want to make sure that people are honest. And if everybody was coming along to the groups and hating it, then I would really want to know that. So we make sure that somebody who wasn't involved does the interviews, who people can be honest with. And then people have said they're happy for these anonymous quotes to be shared. So none of these will tell you who's talking. I'm very careful about that. And I don't even know who's talking, actually. All right, so people talk about their reasons for coming along, and many people talk about just wanting to feel some connection, to meet people who are in these kind of situations so that they feel less alone, they feel understood. And people also think about wanting to see the future more positively, so feeling that it's difficult to see a way forward. And I think many people affected by Huntington's have felt that way from time to time. The last quote on this slide, I think, is really important to me. They all are, but this one where somebody said that they'd never had an intervention psychologically from anyone who understood Huntington's, and the importance of somebody understanding HD if they're going to support someone affected by HD, to me, is really critical. So this person's excitement about HDA during the courses, I completely understand where that came from, but it also makes me sad that this was something that was so new for them. But I guess we're doing our best to do something about that. So there is that. So they were excited, they were optimistic, they were finding a way forward. So these are some of the things that people think about. For Anna, I guess once she comes into the group and once anybody comes into the group early on, we'd start by kind of exploring that person's feelings at the time, the things that they're struggling with, what's making Huntington's feel particularly difficult, because we all know it is difficult. We get people thinking about grief and loss because often it's thought about in a very reductive way. So people feel that I have had people say to me they only feel allowed to grieve once somebody physically passes. But I think anybody who's familiar with Huntington's knows about the little losses and changes and the bigger ones that happen along the HD journey before that point, right at the end. So we do talk a lot about grief and loss as part of the groups because that is so important as such a definitional part of the condition. We also make sure people in the groups have lots of time to talk to each other and get to know each other's stories because we want the group to feel comfortable. And I think it's fair to say it is weird coming along to therapy ever. Group therapy can be quite tricky. Online group therapy is probably the trickiest because you're coming along and hopefully going to be very honest about some very difficult stuff in a group with people that you've never met before. So we do try to support those kind of connections between people right from the beginning because that's really important. In the first session, we also start straight away with teaching that toolkit of skills that I talked about. So we get people learning some brief relaxation exercises so that people can go away and start using those at home. And anyone who's been to the sessions will have heard me say many times that it's like a muscle. The more you practice, the stronger it gets. So we get people doing that right from the off. As we move into the next part of the course, we start to think about coping. And I think one thing that's really important to say is that everybody who's come to the groups has things that they're doing in order to cope, in order to survive. Now, sometimes people think of those as positive or less positive or helpful and less helpful, but everybody is doing something to keep themselves going in a tough situation. And what's been really valuable for lots of people is swapping those strategies among the group. I know lots of people have learned new things or thought to try new things or thought to pick up again old things that they used to do because of something that somebody else has said. So the group really becomes very helpful for each other. Now, we, the HDA advisor, and me, and as our group leads, we give extra ideas. We talk about techniques for mindful awareness of the choices that we make. It's very easy to fall into making kind of reflexive decisions, especially when we're under stress and we're struggling. So we get people thinking very consciously about the choices that they're making and how that ties into what's really important to you, because often people find that they've kind of wandered off track a bit from where they'd really want to be, sometimes without even realizing. We also get people paying attention to the stories that our minds tell us, and we all have storyteller minds who often help us and are usually trying to help us, but sometimes those stories are negative or critical or otherwise unhelpful. And all of this helps us to get our agency back to decide which choices we want to make, what stories we want to buy into, and helps us make the decisions that are going to help our mental well-being. We also talk a lot about coping and adjustment. So just like grief, it's a lot more complicated than it looks. People can sometimes get this idea. I think 5 stages of grief is a really good example. That's one that many people are aware of from pop culture. But this idea that you have 5 stages of grief and you progress from one to the other, to the other, to the other, until you reach this point where you have accepted or adjusted. And then that's kind of job done. But this is not the way that, it's actually not the way that the process was originally written by the person who developed it. But it's also not the way that people experience it, because we go back and forward through these processes. We might be angry one day and unhappy another, and another day we might actually feel that we're coping quite well at that time, and we can feel like we're going backwards and forwards quite a lot. That's not a failure. It's part of the process of coping and adjusting to Huntington's or to anything significant. So trying to change the way that we think about this so that we are less critical of ourselves when we do find ourselves back at what feels like square one. So we do talk about self-compassion and self-care a lot. And one thing that we know is that people in the groups are amazing at looking after each other as well. The kindness that we see in these groups is unbelievable. And I know that is a feature of the HD community in general, but again, it's always worth saying. So we move on to talking about values, which I've already said are a really important part of this piece of work. Now, Anna, our example person, likely does have a strong sense of what's important to her. So we've talked about her wanting to support Matt, wanting to stay in her job that she loves. And sometimes those values are going to be in conflict because it's very difficult to be, well, difficult, impossible to be 100% supporting Matt and focused on him, but also hanging on to that job that she loves. That's really tough. So that's likely to be causing some distress for her at times. In the wider group, we would support people to figure out the things that make life feel rich and meaningful and purposeful. So for Anna, that's supporting her partner, continuing in her job because that's meaningful to her. We do exercises to help people figure out those things that are really important to them. And we're really trying to get people to focus on the stuff that matters to them, not to the people around them or that they think they should think is important, but the things that genuinely really matter and what their biggest priorities are right now. Because the next stage that we work on is getting people to turn their values into actual real world action. And that might involve making a decision about a particular problem you want to solve, or a change you want to make, or something you want to start doing, maybe that you used to do, or maybe something that you'd like to start doing to get you more aligned with the things that really matter to you. And this stage is really practical, which sometimes surprises people because therapy is often fluffy and about feelings, right? And that's important too. But this is about which value do you want to align to? What is your long-term goal that's going to get you closer to it? And what does your first step look like? And then we get people thinking about what resources can you use to help you get there? What barriers might you run into, and how can you plan for those to try and succeed as well as you can? And during the group, everybody starts taking these small steps towards their values as part of the process. And that does include the group leads. I have made a lot of small positive changes to my life because and again, everybody knows I say this, if you've been to a group, I practice what I preach. If I'm asking people to do it in the group, I'm going to do it myself. So I have made small changes. I do not wander around with my nose in my phone as much as I used to. I've started making myself proper coffee. These are small things, but small things add up and they make a difference. And you start to see everybody making these little changes and things starting to shift for them. And it is really lovely to see the impact on people as the group goes on. And the sense of mutual support is really, really something. So for Anna, I guess just to give you an idea of what this might actually look like for somebody, it might mean that she's practicing these mindful exercises, flexing that muscle, right, to help her step back from those unhappy and anxious thoughts, help her look after her emotional well-being. It might be those more practical bits about how can she make things easier on herself as she's supporting Matt and keeping working, because both those things matter to her. And it might be about building her self-compassion when she's not doing everything perfectly, because my experience has definitely been that people are very good at being hard on themselves when they're actually coping really well with some really tough stuff. It might be looking at her resources around her, both the practical ones and her own emotional resources to help her cope differently. It might be about thinking about long term and how can she make changes that will help her well-being over the long term, using her values to guide that. And it might be about building connections with other group members. So this doesn't happen for every group as far as I know, although I guess I might not always know, but certainly some of our groups stay in touch and keep meeting up after the course is finished. And I know that people really value that. So that's something that people find really helpful. And by the end of the course, the idea is that you will be your own therapist. So I always say, hopefully you won't need to come along and see somebody in therapy every week, because you'll have internalized all of this stuff and started using these skills on independently. So the whole idea really is that we're not going to make everybody's well-being 100% better and perfect in 8 weeks, because that's just not realistic. In fact, having perfect well-being is probably not realistic for anybody. But we are teaching skills that people can go away and keep using after the course finishes. So noticing your emotions, coping with them differently, and making these plans based on your values and what really matters to you to create real world change. So that might include those mindful exercises I've talked about. It might include changing your relationship to difficult thoughts and feelings. And it might include getting the awareness and control over those stories that I talked about, so that you can feel a bit more in control, a bit more autonomous around the difficulties you're experiencing. And all this is helpful for mental well-being. So, does it work? This is probably the biggest question, right? Now, I said I'm not going to do too much by way of numbers today, but the general overall numbers show us that yes, it is supporting people. So people are feeling less low. We use a measure for depression. I don't like to use the label depression. I would rather talk about low mood. But we're seeing improvements of between a third and half, give or take, depending on which group people have attended and which kind of population people are from. But those are clinically pretty major improvements in terms of how people are actually feeling. That's making a difference to people's daily lives. And we also see these improvements in terms of anxiety. So not quite a third, 28%, up to about half, again, depending on the group. But we're seeing these big reductions in difficulties. And we're also seeing a smaller improvement in people's feeling of being overwhelmed by difficult and upsetting thoughts. And all of these are really important, really meaningful, and represent people feeling different as a result of coming along. What's really exciting, actually, is that we're also seeing these difficulties apparently sustained at short-term follow-up. Now, we only follow up with people after about a month or 6 weeks, but at that point, people have finished therapy, they've gone on, they're living their lives, and it looks as though those improvements are sticking over the very short term. And ideally, we want to be looking longer term for that. But it is really promising. Those are the only numbers I'm going to show you guys. What I do want to do is give you some of the stories of people who've been through, some of the things that they've said about how coming to the group has felt. So we always ask about what's working and what's not working, because we want to keep doing the stuff that works and stop doing the stuff that doesn't. So people talk to us a lot about feeling less alone, feeling able to talk to people who understand. People talk about how supportive the groups feel. I love the description of it being like a warm virtual hug. That was just a really lovely description. And certainly from being in the room, I feel that too. Feeling comforted, feeling not so much on your own with everything, and just the really cathartic feeling of walking into a session where everybody has gone through something similar to what you have, in some way at least, and just the feeling of safety is something that's really important to people. So I guess we knew that was going to be important. Hearing it from the people who've been through it is quite something. We also found that people were finding ACT itself useful, that people were finding the strategies it was providing was actually helping with mental well-being, which again is really important. The support aspect of being with people who understand, really important. But if that was all that was helping, then bringing that kind of therapeutic element isn't working. But we found it is, which is really good. So people talked about the idea of learning something different, learning new approaches, learning new ways of looking at things that help with mental well-being. People talked about values a lot. You will hear that I've already talked about values a lot in this talk, so it is something that's really central to ACT. But people talk about understanding their values, living by their values, keeping those values at the forefront of their mind and thinking, what's the most important thing to me and how am I going to achieve that? Just talking about how it's actually really changed their way of thinking, which is really important, and made me really happy to see when I saw that people were still talking about this months after they'd been through one of the courses. It really looks like this stuff is sticking with people and that people are finding it helpful. We found that having therapy specifically focused on Huntington's is especially helpful. Again, as a therapist, I think this is something that I expected would be useful, but people talked about feeling really validated, that, and I've seen this in so many people, that people come along and they have started to worry that there is something wrong with the way that they're responding to this situation, that they should be handling it better. And should is kind of a dirty word in therapy. It usually means you're being really hard on yourself. But actually, somebody described it as these are normal things. You're impacted by Huntington's. It's understandable. You're feeling this way. You're not crazy, is what this person said. And somebody described a moment when a person in the group kind of faced Huntington's and really engaged with it, and that this was something that was really powerful, and that this person felt happens for everybody in the course, and it really stuck with them that moment in particular. So the fact that this is not just ACT, not just a nice supportive space, but completely focused on HD is something that people found really, really helpful. We also found that session delivery, people were quite happy with the way that we were going about it. We try to keep it pretty informal. It's not just it's not like right here is just you guys listening to me, right? But we don't do it that way. It's an experience with everybody talking, I think, because that is really important, and that's what makes the difference. So people talked about feeling that the group leads are really wanting to understand that it helps them to feel emotionally vulnerable, to share how they're feeling, lets them feel seen and heard in a way that they usually don't, which really got me in the feels, as the kids say. But it was really good to hear, because that's what we want. We want a place where people feel they can come and talk about that stuff that is really hard to talk about. People even talked about looking forward to the sessions, looking forward to spending time with the group. And this is the place where I can again sing the praises of the HDA advisors, who have just done the most wonderful job of being the touch point, the person who group members can get in touch with if things are feeling difficult. It's the HDA advisor who steps up. They just do a really incredible job. I did not have like a short pithy quote that I could put up here, but I had lots of long discussions about how valuable that was to people and the massive difference that it made. So when we write this up properly as a research paper, we're going to make sure to focus on that, of course, but I also wanted to say it here because that feels really important. All right, stuff that felt more difficult, because we always ask about both. People talked about time. So the sessions feeling too short, the course length feeling too short, people wishing that there could be more time. This was always done in a really lovely way, where people said, we understand that there's not enough people, there's not enough time to go around, but we just really wish that you could. And people talked about feeling that the courses just went by in a flash and it was sad that it finished. Some people spoke about the feeling of emotions being stirred up that were quite challenging and quite difficult to cope with, feeling more in tune with them and saying, well, it's not really a bad thing, but it would have been nice to have some more time to sort of explore that and cope with it. And I have to say, as a therapist, that is something that I kind of always feel as well. Like, it would be lovely to have more time with everyone. So this is not something I have a solution to, but it is something that I recognize, so it feels important to talk about. Finding time for the course on the side of the people coming as well is something that's quite tricky. So somebody talked about how difficult it is to find time when you're looking after somebody, of course, and how sometimes that could feel quite stressful. So when we're giving people things to try at home between sessions, sometimes they wouldn't try and they'd feel guilty, or they'd even feel like, oh God, I've really failed that week, which is what this person said. I always lean really hard on you don't have to do it. It's completely optional. We do understand. But I also know how I would feel if I hadn't done something that somebody had suggested I do. So again, it's a relatable feeling, but this is not the kind of situation where anybody would ever be made to feel like they'd failed. But I do understand how somebody could feel that way. People talked about sort of juggling the balls, finding space for the course and how difficult that could be, and also trying to practically apply things after the course as well. So all of these really people talked about really valuable things they wanted to do, but sometimes it can feel difficult to practically do it, which I guess, again, will be a relatable feeling to anybody who is busy, who is caregiving. People also spoke about the emotional impact of the sessions, and I have put this as feeling that it was difficult, but actually it was kind of a mixed bag, I suppose. Somebody talked about it being really cathartic, the amount of emotional impact that they experienced, that it felt validating, but also that it brought a lot of anger with them because they thought, I could have had this years ago, and somebody should have offered this to me years ago. And I think that brought up an awful lot of sadness and grief, which is, again, understandable. People also spoke about the group itself, the sessions, feeling really kind of protected and really positive, but that actually when you leave, you kind of lose that protection and you lose that, someone called it a bubble, like a little safe and understanding bubble, and then you leave, and that feels really tough. So we're kind of conscious of that. We are trying to, I was going to say we're trying to address it by putting on kind of refresher sessions where people can come for a bit of a catch up and a bit of time with people who've attended the groups. And we are, and I hope that helps. I don't think it replaces coming to a session every week, but it's all steps in the right direction. So something, hopefully, at least. People also spoke about a few smaller bits and pieces. So sometimes it would feel like, I think particularly in the earlier groups that we ran, it would feel as if there was a lot of new information and not as much chance to talk to each other. Sometimes, though, people felt that there was too much talking and it would be nice to have some more information. I don't think there was really a consistent thread there. But I think it's just an acceptance that we're not always going to get it quite right. But I think the kind of split opinions suggest that hopefully we're getting there. People said it was hard to remember everything. We do have handbooks which have been in development for a long time, which are now nearly done. So people who've come along to the sessions will get kind of a handbook that's got all of the information in it that we talk about, kind of written in a way that will make sense without me sat there talking about it, which hopefully will be helpful for people. People also spoke about the course being online. So everybody kind of acknowledged that with people coming from across the UK, it was the only way to do it. But somebody also said really poignantly, you know, if at a certain point when somebody was quite distressed, if you'd been in a room, you'd have got up from your chair and just given them a hug. And I also feel the distance that online therapy kind of puts in place. Practically, there's nothing else that we could do, but it's a feeling that I recognize. And we did try breakout rooms. Kind of mixed results. I think some people really enjoyed those and a chance to kind of connect with a smaller number of people and have some more kind of close conversations. But sometimes people felt that it could get a little off topic and they would rather have been in the main room, kind of focusing on some therapeutic material. On balance, what we've done is stop doing breakout rooms, but make more time for people to talk and connect in the main session. So hopefully trying to strike a balance that makes everybody happy. So overall, we did say to people as part of these interviews, are these groups helping people affected by HD? Do you feel they will help other people? Some people said they've already recommended it to others. Certainly our kind of numerical feedback seems to suggest that people are mostly feeling that it's recommendable to others. People talk about feeling more grateful, feeling like they're not on their own. People say it's improved their life and they do think it has potential to really help people. I really love this kind of last quote here. I love all of them because it's really good to hear it's making a difference. But somebody saying they feel more trusting that they'll come out the other side, that life will go on, they'll come out the other side of things. They have more faith in their ability to overcome things. Before it felt like things would happen and it would feel like the end of the world, but it didn't feel like that so much anymore. And that was just a really beautiful expression of, I guess, what we hope that people might feel. And we asked people about one thing that they took away from the group. So people said that it made you think about what's really important to you, and that's values again, isn't it? So when you're a caregiver, you're very reactive, you're just trying to cope and stay on top of things. You don't have that time to reflect. So giving the group gave people a window of opportunity to think about their values, what's important, and how they want to move forward with their life. So making a difference to the way they're approaching this. People spoke about being good at sticking to their values, even when things have been tough, being a bit more assertive about it and feeling more confident about saying, this is what's important to me. People talked about acceptance a little bit more. So rather than being stuck in that endless battle against difficult emotions and struggles, feeling that they can sit with those things without fighting them and save their energy for other things that are more important. And again, I love this particular one where somebody said, try and do something for yourself, even a little thing. It's okay to be selfish sometimes. That's something that I like to tell people, so I'd love to see it reflected back here. So this person said, go on the course, give yourself the hour and a half for those weeks because you are important. And I really wanted to share that one in particular here today. So coming to the end, because this is a lot of me talking, isn't it? But next steps for us, we are continuing to offer the ACT programs. We have 2 running at the moment. We're going to keep offering these refresher sessions where we bring people back together for a bit of a skills refresher, so going through something that was important and helpful from the groups, but also give people a chance to reconnect with each other and experience that being in a room with people who understand what you're going through again. We are continuing to collect data, like some of the stuff that I've been showing you just now, and we're going to write those up and publish them, which I really should have done by now, but I am working on it. And we're finding other therapeutic collaborators, so trying to reach out to more people, continuing to test out the groups and make sure they're as good as we can get them, trying to help as many people as we can. And I am in a very happy position of being able to share some good news. I got some very, very recently, and I was just told I was allowed to share it yesterday, so I thought I'd share it with you. But we have just been given quite a lot of money to do long-term research into mental health and healthcare for HD families. And the HDA are part of our steering committee, the people who help to guide us in asking the right questions and carrying out that research. This is to help us do research and create resources around understanding the difficulties that people from HD families face. And this is going to be in partnership with the HD community. We have a lot of people helping us with this. We have the HDA. We also have people from HD families who have HD, who are gene positive, at risk, people who are caregivers, who are advising us to make sure that we're asking the right questions, because we want to make the best use we can of this time and this money we have. This is a big opportunity and not one that we get very often. So we're going to do the best with it we possibly can. And we're going to use that to create not just research, but also meaningful stuff that families can use to help advocate for yourself. If you're someone affected by Huntington's, it is not easy to get help. We've talked about some of that today. The system doesn't make it easy, and I know that people in here will know that already. But knowing what difficulties you're facing, knowing what kind of help is out there, and knowing even things like the language to use when you're asking for help, things like that can help you to get the help that you need. So we want to develop things which will help people to do that. And it will also help those healthcare workers I talked about. So there are amazing HD experts out there, but there are also people who are not HD expert trying to support people affected by HD. So we're going to create resources and knowledge also to help those people to understand mental well-being difficulties in Huntington's, because that will have knock-on effects for the community as well, we hope. So it's nice to finish on a bit of good news, I guess. And the other thing to say is, again, a massive thank you. So the people who came along to our therapy groups when they didn't know if it was going to work, and were honest and brave and just really amazing people. Without those people, this doesn't happen. So we really, really appreciate them, and of course appreciate the HDA and all of the groups who helped us to make this happen, because none of this would be happening without any of them. And thank you very much for listening to me talk for, gosh, 45 minutes, I think. It's always really, really good to be here. Really grateful that the HDA offered. And I must also say thank you to our funders who have helped us to do this too. My email address is on here. If you have questions, if you want to follow up, if you want to join the research we're doing, drop me an email. I promise I'm friendly. I would love to hear from you. And thank you so much for listening to me today.